They say you only discover someone's true character when they're pushed to their limit. And sometimes, in those moments of deep adversity, extraordinary power and determination can burst forth from the most unexpected individuals. This is the story of Ebony Lancaster, a self-made entrepreneur whose unassuming trip from New York to London turned into a life-altering showdown at John F. Kennedy International Airport, when a uniformed officer tore her passport in a humiliating act of intimidation. Ebony's quiet resilience exploded into a chain of actions that changed the face of air travel forever. Buckle up for a ride through betrayal, triumph, and a truly unforgettable brand of karma. Ebony Lancaster had always been a woman on a mission. Even as a child growing up in a modest two-bedroom apartment in Harlem, she was keenly aware of how the world sometimes assigned value based on appearances, skin color, accent, attire. Her mother worked 2 jobs, cleaning offices by day and caring for the elderly by night. Her father had passed away when she was too young to remember him, leaving behind only a dusty set of vinyl records and the memory of his gentle soul that her mother recounted from time to time. From an early age, Ebony recognized that life was not fair, yet she refused to let that reality define her. She threw herself into her studies, excelling first in mathematics and later in business analytics. On Sundays, while other children played, Ebony would sift through copies of the Wall Street Journal she found in the recycling bin, reading anything she could about markets, companies, and mergers. At night, she would dream about traveling the world, about walking through bustling airports, hearing different languages, and feeling free. By high school, Ebony's potential was undeniable. She participated in business competitions, she gave speeches on leadership, and she led a community group to raise funds for underprivileged kids. Her passion for entrepreneurship only grew stronger during her years at Columbia University, where she majored in business and finance. The network she developed was wide, including professors who saw in her a spark of genius and mentors who admired her resilience. Despite her accomplishments, Ebony had to confront slights and microaggressions daily. In certain corporate spaces, her intelligence was questioned simply because of her race and her gender. She got used to the sideways glances, the polite but dismissive nods, the unspoken assumption that she was out of place. These barriers only motivated her further. In her mid-20s, she started a small financial consulting firm that quickly gained traction. By the time she turned 30, she had built a modest but sturdy empire advising tech startups in Silicon Valley and beyond on their fundraising and growth strategies. Yet Ebony didn't measure success purely in dollars and cents. She funneled large portions of her earnings back into philanthropic work, helping young African-American girls gain access to STEM programs and international exchange opportunities. She believed that exposure was everything. If she could help them see more of the world, perhaps they would also dare to dream big. Still, for all her globe-trotting experiences, Ebony had never quite shaken off the fear that at any moment someone might try to strip her of her dignity. She knew life was not simply about collecting stamps on a passport, but about commanding respect in a world often designed to overlook or undervalue her. That haunting feeling would become the spark that ignited a dramatic change, not just for her, but for an entire airline and every soul connected to it. Ebony's business demanded that she travel frequently, meeting clients from Lagos to Tokyo, from London to Sao Paulo. Her next major trip was to London, where she had scheduled a critical meeting with an up-and-coming sustainable technology startup that wanted to expand globally. The CEO had specifically sought her out, impressed by her track record and ability to see potential in underrepresented founders. Even though Ebony had embarked on countless transatlantic flights, this time felt special. For one, She had cleared her schedule to allow herself a few days after the meetings to explore London at a leisurely pace, visiting museums, trying new cuisines, and finally taking the time to see friends she hadn't met in years. The trip was also personal, a chance to reflect on how far she had come, but Ebony was also pragmatic. She had seen it all before in airport lines, people being treated differently based on how they looked. She had been singled out for random checks or forced to answer extra security questions. Still, she carried herself with an unshakable confidence and always arrived at the airport well ahead of schedule to leave room for any unexpected delays. On the morning of her flight, Ebony awoke early. She went through her usual routine, a quick run along Riverside Park, a warm shower, and a healthy breakfast. She made sure her passport was in its usual place in her purse, safely zipped up. She also double-checked her electronic boarding pass on her phone for a flight on a mid-sized carrier called Global Horizons Airlines. She had traveled with them a few times before without any issues, though they weren't the biggest or the most prestigious. They boasted a decent safety record. Her car service arrived promptly, and as she rode toward JFK, Ebony couldn't help but feel a flicker of excitement. She reviewed her meeting notes and typed up a few last-minute ideas for the startup pitch she was going to assess. She had done her homework on the green tech sector, and she believed in the CEO's vision. Her only apprehension was about the unpredictability of airports. What Ebony didn't know was that her entire worldview was about to be upended. A single horrifying encounter would challenge every last shred of composure and faith she had in basic human decency. And while Ebony's resourcefulness and grit had gotten her through a lifetime of challenges, the incident that awaited her would push her beyond any threshold she had ever encountered. Stepping into Terminal 4 at John F. Kennedy International Airport always gave Ebony a slight thrill. She loved the spectacle of people from countless nations crisscrossing each other's paths, the lights and the announcements overhead, the sense that every departure board spelled out the next great adventure. But on this particular day, something in the air felt different, heavy, almost ominous. She reached the Global Horizons Airlines check-in desk, towing a sleek black carry-on behind her. After taking her place in line, she noticed an unusual tension. The line wasn't especially long, but it didn't seem to move. A few people stepped aside after hushed conversations with staff. One man, looking flustered, was escorted away by an officer toward a side room. Ebony tried to shake off the uneasy feeling. Perhaps it was just a heightened security protocol or some computer glitch that was slowing the process. Airports always had their share of minor crises. When it was her turn to approach the counter, she offered a polite greeting to the check-in agent, a middle-aged woman with graying hair pinned back in a tight bun. Ebony smiled warmly, handed over her passport, and placed her carry-on on the scale. The woman tapped a few keys on her computer, her gaze flitting to Ebony's face, then back to the screen. Her frown deepened. "One moment," the agent said abruptly before disappearing behind a partition. Ebony waited, confusion creeping in. She felt eyes on her travelers behind her in line, staffers at neighboring counters, all glancing her way, but quickly looking away when she returned their stare. After several long minutes, the agent returned. Her expression remained inscrutable. "You'll have to speak with the airline's security officer," the agent said tersely, pointing to a tall, uniformed man standing just beyond a roped barrier. "Is something wrong with my ticket?" Ebony asked, striving to keep her tone neutral. The agent's only response was a glance that spoke volumes, a combination of suspicion and disinterest. Ebony sighed inwardly, remembering how she had faced similar attitudes in the past. She took back her passport and documents, then wheeled her carry-on toward the security officer. His name badge read Officer Bradley Thompson. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a rigid stance and an air of impatience, he was in his early 40s. At a glance, Ebony could sense he did not appreciate being questioned or contradicted. "I need to verify some details regarding your booking," Thompson said, voice clipped. He motioned to a cramped side room, partitioned by glass. It had a small table, a row of plastic chairs, and the stale odor of disinfectant. Ebony's heart rate kicked up a notch. Nonetheless, she maintained a calm, polite demeanor. "Of course," she replied. "Could you explain what the issue might be?" He ignored her question. Instead, he gestured for her documents. Ebony handed over her passport. Thompson flipped through its pages slowly, as if scrutinizing each visa stamp. Ebony started to explain that her flight was leaving in just over an hour, but he cut her off. "Ma'am, I need you to sit down," he said. "We have some concerns about the authenticity of your documents." "Authenticity?" Ebony echoed, feeling her stomach clench. She had renewed her passport a year ago. It was absolutely legitimate. "Officer Thompson, I assure you it's valid. I've traveled internationally with it multiple times." Thompson's scowl deepened. "We'll see about that." In that moment, Ebony sensed a shift in the air. The tension she had felt earlier solidified into a kind of dread. She had faced bias before, but there was something especially unsettling in Thompson's demeanor, something personal, like a simmering hostility searching for an outlet. Her mind raced. She tried to remain composed, reminding herself that she had done nothing wrong. She had no criminal record, no questionable history that could raise red flags. And yet, here she was, at the mercy of a man who seemed determined to find fault. Time seemed to crawl in that cramped room. Officer Thompson fiddled with a small device, scanning Ebony's passport. She watched as he repeated the process, each time frowning more deeply. At one point, Ebony softly asked if there was a problem. He ignored her, then abruptly stood up. "Wait here," he growled, clutching her passport in one hand as he strode out of the room. Ebony was left alone, her thoughts spiraling between confusion, anger, and a creeping sense of powerlessness. She glanced at the clock on the wall. 40 minutes until boarding. When Thompson returned, he was accompanied by a second officer, a woman with kind eyes who seemed more even-keeled. However, Thompson stepped forward before she could speak. "MAAM, he said, a triumphant gleam in his eyes. "We're going to have to confiscate this passport." Ebony's heart skipped a beat. Confiscate? On what grounds? Thompson tapped the passport's cover. "We have reason to believe this passport has been tampered with, potentially forged. That's a federal offense." Ebony's eyes widened. "Forged? That's impossible." Her voice wavered, but did not betray fear. It carried indignation, righteous and clear. "I renewed that passport through official channels. You can verify with the State Department if you have to." Thompson snorted. "Sure. Meanwhile, you can't travel with this piece of... And then it happened so quickly, Ebony almost couldn't process it. Thompson applied pressure to the passport's spine, jerked the cover, and with a sudden violent motion, ripped one of the inner pages nearly in half. A gasp escaped Ebony's lips as she witnessed the defacement of her own legal document. She froze, eyes locked on the torn page, fluttering limply from the binding. "Now it's definitely invalid," Thompson said, his voice cold. The female officer beside him looked stricken, but said nothing. Her silence felt complicit, like a painful betrayal of duty. For a long moment, Ebony couldn't speak. A buzzing filled her ears, and her chest burned with fury. This was more than an inconvenience. This was an act of blatant intimidation, an outright violation. She wanted to scream, to demand justice at that very second, but she knew it wouldn't help. She forced her mind to focus, because the Ebony Lancaster she knew did not crumble under oppression. The second officer finally found her voice, stepping forward. "Officer Thompson, we should stay out of this." "Officer Reyes," Thompson barked. "I'll handle it, Miss Lancaster. You are free to leave. But you won't be boarding any flight today or any time soon with this passport." Ebony stood up, her pulse hammering. "You tore it on purpose," she said, her words trembling with quiet rage. "You had no right to do that." Officer Thompson stared her down, his lips curling into a smirk. "Prove it," he said, tossing the damaged passport on the table. In that moment, Ebony understood that she was dealing with a man who felt invincible. A man who believed his uniform granted him unassailable power. He had acted with arrogant certainty that no one could hold him accountable. Ebony's voice turned steely. "I will prove it," she said. "You're going to regret this." Thompson let out a dismissive grunt. "Sure, lady. Next." With that, Ebony scooped up her ravaged passport, stuffed it into her purse, and walked out of the room, her head held high. Behind her, Thompson's self-satisfied chuckle echoed against the walls. She could have screamed, could have called for a supervisor, but instinct told her to leave before he concocted a reason to escalate the confrontation into something even worse. As she exited, Ebony caught the sympathetic, apologetic look from Officer Reyes. It was a small consolation, overshadowed by her indignation and the tears she refused to let fall. Outside, the airport chaos continued, oblivious to the injustice that had just occurred. Ebony stood near a row of deserted check-in kiosks, trying to steady her breathing. She pulled out her phone. She would call her attorney, call anyone who could help. She refused to let Thompson's actions be swept under the rug. Little did she know this moment was the catalyst. What began as a humiliating assault on her dignity would become the spark that ignited a firestorm, one that would reach the executive boardrooms of Global Horizons Airlines and eventually set Ebony on a path she never anticipated. A path that would end with her holding absolute power over the very corporation that had employed Officer Thompson and the entire staff complicit in her mistreatment. The next few hours blurred together in a tumultuous haze of phone calls, confusion, and rising anger. Ebony filed a formal complaint with airport authorities, only to be shuffled from one desk to another. Most staff members gave her polite yet practiced apologies, the kind that carry little empathy. At one point, a security supervisor told her she could file a grievance with the Transportation Security Administration (TSA), but Ebony quickly realized Thompson wasn't actually a TSA agent. He was some type of private security contractor employed by Global Horizons Airlines. She was stunned. How did an airline hire officers with the authority to detain passengers, much less damage someone's passport? The question gnawed at her, fueling a sense of outrage and also curiosity. This was deeper than a single man's bigotry. It spoke to a system that enabled him, if not openly, then through negligence or poor oversight. Before heading home, Ebony took pictures of her torn passport, capturing every angle of the damaged page. She gathered the names of bystanders who had witnessed parts of the incident, scribbling down their contact information. A few passengers and one airline clerk, quietly outraged by what they'd seen, provided statements. Ebony was grateful for their support, although she doubted they fully grasped the gravity of the situation. She'd missed her flight by a mile, and any hope of rescheduling was impossible without a valid passport. Since it was only partially torn, Ebony wasn't sure if she could use it, but she had a strong suspicion it was no longer acceptable. She needed a new one, and that would take time, a commodity she didn't have if she wanted to save the business deal in London. Once she reached her apartment, Ebony collapsed onto her couch. She stared at the city lights outside her window, the twinkling skyline mocking her sense of helplessness. Anger rose again, white hot. This was more than an inconvenience, it was an assault on her identity. She vowed to take action, real action, not just the bureaucratic route that often ended in dead ends. First, she needed to fix her immediate predicament, traveling to London. Fortunately, Ebony's connections were extensive. She made a flurry of calls to old friends at Columbia, to mentors in government positions. Eventually, she managed to schedule an emergency appointment at the nearest regional passport agency. By pulling a few strings, she hoped to have a new passport in a matter of days. Then came the question, Should she let this go after getting her passport replaced? Ebony knew herself too well. Letting go was not an option. She drafted a scathing email to Global Horizons Airlines, detailing every second of her ordeal and demanding an immediate investigation. Then she called her legal counsel, a sharp-tongued lawyer named Simone Garcia, who had handled discrimination cases before and won them. Simone was livid. She encouraged Ebony to pursue every possible avenue: media coverage, civil rights organizations, direct legal action. But Ebony hesitated. She wanted justice, but she also wanted to be strategic. She needed to know precisely who was responsible for employing Officer Thompson and what policies allowed him to operate unchecked. In the days that followed, Ebony managed to secure a new passport under emergency procedures, but the memory of that torn page stayed with her like an unhealed wound. She watched as her complaint against Officer Thompson seemed to vanish into a labyrinth of corporate and legal disclaimers. The airline responded to her email with a bland template apology. "We take all complaints seriously and are investigating the matter internally." Nights became sleepless as Ebony's mind spun with possibilities. She was not just a victim of that day's events. She was a savvy businesswoman who understood corporate structures. If Global Horizons refused to provide accountability, she could use her skills and her resources to force them. While lying awake at 3 a.m., a provocative idea took hold in her mind. An extreme move, to be sure, but Ebony was in a position to make it a reality. She could simply buy a controlling stake in Global Horizons Airlines. It sounded insane at first. Ebony's net worth was impressive, but was it enough to wrest control from an established airline? Maybe, maybe not. She'd need allies, investors, and a thorough analysis of the company's financial vulnerabilities. Yet the sheer audacity of the plan energized her, lighting up her insomnia with a vision of what real accountability could look like. She pictured Thompson's face when he realized the woman he had wronged was now his boss's boss's boss. The idea was satisfying, but Ebony was cautious. Emotions alone could not dictate her strategy. She needed data, facts, a rational approach. She poured herself a cup of strong coffee and began her research. Over the next few nights, Ebony discovered that Global Horizons Airlines was actually in a precarious financial position. They were dealing with mounting debt from an ill-advised expansion into unprofitable routes, and internal leaks suggested a potential shake-up in upper management. The question changed from could she buy the airline to how soon could she pull it off and ensure that justice was served along the way. Ebony's next step was to assemble a team of trusted advisors, people she'd worked with in mergers and acquisitions, seasoned experts who could evaluate Global Horizons from the inside out. She reached out to old colleagues, sending a cryptic message: "I have a lead on a potentially undervalued airline. Need your expertise." Confidential. She also enlisted the help of Simone Garcia to handle any legal complications. In their first formal meeting, Ebony laid out her plan. She wanted to become a majority shareholder in Global Horizons Airlines, or at the very least, gain enough influence to force immediate changes in leadership and corporate policies. This was personal, but Ebony also saw the potential business upside. Global Horizons had workable infrastructure and a moderate brand presence. With better leadership and strategic focus, it could bounce back in the market. The group listened carefully. Some expressed skepticism, but no one doubted Ebony's determination. Over the course of a week, they began to map out a strategy. Step 1, confirmed Global Horizons, was indeed seeking investors or open to a buyout. Step 2, begin negotiations through a shell company or an anonymous group of investors to avoid tipping off the airline that Ebony was behind the move. Step 3, Once a controlling stake was secured, Ebony would leverage her position to oust the current board, implement sweeping reforms, and demand accountability for the incident at JFK. One of Ebony's most valuable allies was Gregory Shaw, a veteran investment banker with decades of experience orchestrating leveraged buyouts. He was the kind of man who could read a balance sheet like a palm reader and spot hidden opportunities or pitfalls. Shaw had known Ebony since her early days as a financial prodigy. He admired her ethics and her drive, and when Ebony explained the backstory, the blatant racism and abuse of power, he was on board without hesitation. "Let's do it," Shaw said with a grin, leaning back in his leather office chair. "We can approach their major shareholders quietly. My guess is that if we offer them a way out at a decent price, they'll jump at it, especially if the airline's finances are as precarious as our research suggests." Simone chimed in. "We'll need to be cautious about the officer in question. He's not a direct airline employee. He works for a security firm contracted by Global Horizons. The legal lines can get murky." Ebony nodded. "We'll tackle it from both sides. If we're controlling the company, we control the contracts, including their security contracts. We can sever ties with any agency that employs officers like Thompson. And if the airline has any responsibility in allowing such abuses to occur, we'll hold them accountable too." Shaw scribbled some notes. "I'll start reaching out to potential sellers of Global Horizons stock. In the meantime, Ebony, you should keep your head down. If they know you're behind this, it might complicate negotiations or cause them to dig in their heels." Ebony exhaled slowly, feeling a surge of energy. "Absolutely. Let's make sure we operate under the radar for now. But believe me, once we're in control, I want every last person who enabled that man's behavior to face the consequences." A hush fell over the room, each person contemplating the gravity of the undertaking. It wasn't just a corporate maneuver, it was a moral crusade with Ebony at the helm. And while each advisor had their role to play, the emotional core of the mission was hers alone. She was determined to transform her pain into power, both for herself and for others who had suffered similar abuses and lacked the means to fight back. While Ebony and her team laid the groundwork for the audacious buyout, she also pursued legal avenues to ensure Officer Thompson faced the consequences of his actions. Through Simone's network, Ebony filed an official complaint with the Point US Department of Justice, alleging civil rights violations and destruction of property under color of authority. It was a complicated process, especially since Thompson worked for a private security firm, but Ebony refused to let that deter her. The media got wind of the incident, thanks in part to a local journalist Ebony had known since her college days. A short article appeared in a New York newspaper. "Businesswoman alleges racial abuse by airline security officer at JFK." Although Ebony's name was not initially mentioned, the piece highlighted the broader issue of privately contracted security personnel and the potential for misconduct. The story gained traction online, with activists calling for greater oversight. Global Horizons Airlines responded to the media inquiries with a sanitized statement: "We deeply regret any distress caused to the passenger in question. We are conducting an internal review and will take appropriate action if necessary." The words lacked substance, fueling Ebony's resolve. Meanwhile, Simone faced hurdles in getting law enforcement agencies to investigate Thompson. The local authorities seemed reluctant, citing insufficient evidence. This was infuriating, but not surprising. Ebony realized that real justice might only come once she had the leverage of ownership over the airline that employed Thompson's firm. She intended to wield that leverage like a scalpel, precise, unyielding, and aimed directly at the rot within the system. Despite the obstacles, Ebony found some reassurance in the outpouring of support she received. Civil rights organizations, legal aid groups, and countless social media users sent messages of solidarity. They saw her story as a symbol of the ongoing struggle against racism and injustice, and many applauded Ebony's decision to fight back, particularly in a realm, big business, where so many biases festered behind closed doors. Still, Ebony knew that public sympathy could be fickle. She also knew how important it was not to rely on media pressure alone. Corporations often rode out negative press, waiting for the public to move on to the next scandal. Ebony's plan had to be more direct, more controlling. That meant forging ahead with the purchase plan, no matter how many legal and financial hurdles stood in the way. Each morning, Ebony would wake up, check her phone, and see new messages from her legal or financial teams. Some carried promising news, like a shareholder who expressed willingness to sell his stake in Global Horizons. Others brought frustrating setbacks, like a lender who backed out due to the airline's volatile stock price. But Ebony thrived on the complexity, channeling her indignation into a laser-focused mission. She remembered the moment Thompson tore her passport, how powerless she felt, and she resolved that she would never feel that way again. If the law moved too slowly, if the system proved too cumbersome, she would take matters into her own hands. And so she pressed on, building alliances, raising capital, and gathering the necessary ammunition for a coup that would shake Global Horizons Airlines to its core. With each passing day, the wheels of Ebony's plan turned a little faster. Gregory Shaw and his team managed to secure discreet agreements to purchase significant blocks of Global Horizons stock. Some of these came from frustrated shareholders hoping to cut their losses. Others came from investors with no particular loyalty to the airline. The share prices were volatile, but Ebony's team skillfully navigated the fluctuations. However, a new problem cropped up. Rumors began circulating in business circles that an unknown entity was targeting Global Horizons. Journalists and analysts speculated about a possible takeover. The airline's board of directors grew paranoid, instituting a poison pill strategy, an anti-takeover measure designed to flood the market with additional shares if any one party amassed too large a stake. Ebony's team anticipated this, but it complicated matters nonetheless. They needed to move quickly, accumulating enough shares without triggering the poison pill. In private conversations with her advisors, Ebony weighed her next step. She could reveal herself, try to negotiate with the board directly, and assure them that her involvement would be beneficial. But she doubted they would listen, especially given the pending scandal involving the torn passport. Alternatively, she could continue operating in the shadows, hoping the board would remain clueless until it was too late. Late one evening, Ebony met with Gregory Shaw in his office, overlooking Manhattan. The city lights reflected off the polished wood of his desk. Gregory handed her a folder containing the latest stock purchase agreements. "We're very close, Ebony," he said, a touch of excitement in his voice. "We've accumulated almost 30% of the outstanding shares. Another 10 to 15%, and we'll have a controlling interest unless that poison pill triggers. Then we'll have a real fight on our hands." Ebony studied the documents, her face set in determination. "Then let's be strategic. We can approach a few of the larger institutional investors. If they vote with us, we don't necessarily need to own more than 50% outright." Gregory nodded. "I have a line on a major pension fund that's losing confidence in Global Horizons leadership. They might be willing to side with us, but they'll want to meet the individual leading this. They'll want to know your plan for turning the airline around." Ebony leaned back, rubbing her temples. "So I have to come out of the shadows." "Looks like it," Gregory agreed. "But that means the board will know who's behind these share acquisitions. It might get messy." Ebony smirked. "It's already messy. I'm prepared to handle it." They finalized the plan. Ebony would meet with the pension fund's leadership, laying out her vision for a reformed, profitable airline that would also set new standards for accountability. She would highlight the incompetent or unethical security practices that exposed the airline to lawsuits and tarnished its brand. It was a bold pitch, but Ebony believed wholeheartedly in its validity and in her ability to lead. The next morning, Ebony dressed for battle. She donned a tailored charcoal blazer, an understated yet elegant blouse, and low heels that gave her just enough height to stand toe-to-toe with any CEO or financier. She felt a twinge of nervousness, but also the thrill of stepping fully into her power. At the pension fund's high-rise office, she was greeted by a group of stern-looking executives. Ebony shook each of their hands firmly, introduced herself, and launched into her presentation. She spoke eloquently about Global Horizon's untapped potential, the mismanagement of resources, and the repeated PR disasters that had eroded consumer trust. She emphasized how a strong leadership change could revitalize the company's image and profitability. When it came time to address the impetus behind her pursuit, Ebony didn't flinch. She recounted her harrowing encounter with the security officer, framing it not as a personal vendetta, but as a glaring example of systemic mismanagement. If such abuses remain unchecked, they harm not only the airline's public standing, but also its bottom line, she explained. In today's world, companies must demonstrate ethical governance to maintain consumer confidence. People are watching, especially in the age of social media. The executives exchanged glances, some nodding. The leader of the group, a silver-haired man named Randall Pierce, spoke up. "Miss Lancaster, I appreciate your candor. I've read about your track record in turning around struggling startups, but this is an airline, a much more complex entity. What makes you think you can run it better than the current board?" Ebony's eyes glittered with determination. "Respectfully, Mr. Pierce, their track record speaks for itself. Dwindling profits, internal chaos, and a growing reputation for poor customer service. My background in business analytics, combined with a seasoned team of airline veterans I've quietly assembled, can realign Global Horizon strategies toward profitable markets and operational efficiency. More importantly, I bring a fresh perspective on corporate ethics. When an airline's leadership reflects the diversity and values of its customers, it can't help but succeed." She paused, letting her words sink in. "As for my personal stake in this issue, yes, I was wronged, but my goal isn't revenge. It's to ensure no passenger ever feels powerless the way I did. That means overhauling safety, security, and customer service from the ground up." Silence followed. Then Randall Pierce steepled his fingers and spoke softly. "You've given us a lot to consider, Miss Lancaster. We'll deliberate and inform you of our decision shortly." Ebony thanked them and left, her head held high. She felt both exhilarated and drained. Stepping into the sunlight, she took a deep breath. Whether the pension fund decided to back her or not, she had done something monumental. She had declared her intentions openly, using her voice not just to defend herself, but to advocate for a better corporate culture. As she rode back to her office, Ebony's phone buzzed with a text from Gregory Shaw. "Heard your pitch went well. There's buzz that the board is scrambling. Call me ASAP." Ebony felt the corners of her lips tilt upward. Let them scramble, she thought. Let them realize that the days of quietly sweeping injustices under the rug were over. She was coming, and if she had her way, she'd remake the entire airline in her own image of justice, efficiency, and above all respect. A day later, Randall Pierce informed Ebony that the pension fund was impressed by her plan. They agreed to vote with her block of shares, giving Ebony a potent foothold in the airline's governance. That same week, multiple minority shareholders also expressed interest in selling their stakes, particularly after reading rumors of a possible leadership shake-up. In a swift series of moves orchestrated by Gregory Shaw, Ebony's investment group edged closer to a controlling interest, just shy of the threshold that would trigger the board's poison pill defense. Sensing the shift in power, the board of Global Horizons scheduled an emergency meeting to address the rumored takeover. Ebony was formally invited to present her intentions. She strode into the airline's headquarters, a sleek glass building near downtown Manhattan, carrying a slim briefcase filled with documents outlining her plans for immediate reforms. The boardroom was spacious, its walls lined with large windows revealing a panoramic city view. The directors were already seated around a mahogany table, their faces a mix of apprehension and hostility. At the head of the table sat Malcolm Bremer, the chairman and CEO, a tall man with silver hair and an air of self-importance. His gaze flicked over Ebony dismissively as she took a seat. She wasted no time. "Thank you for granting me this opportunity to speak," she began. "As many of you know, my investment group now holds a significant stake in Global Horizons Airlines. My intention is not to dismantle the company, but to save it from further financial losses and from the reputational damage caused by inadequate leadership." Bremer's lips thinned. "Miss Lancaster, you've made quite a splash in the media, insinuating that Global Horizons harbors institutional racism. I'll have you know we have strict policies against discrimination." Ebony maintained her composure. Policies mean nothing if they're not enforced. A security officer under contract to Global Horizons physically destroyed my passport at JFK. Since then, no one from your management has given me a satisfactory explanation, much less an apology. Bremer bristled. "We've investigated the incident, with all due respect," Ebony interrupted. "Your investigation has produced no tangible results. That's indicative of a deeper structural problem. The firm you hired for security training clearly lacks proper oversight. Furthermore, your financial statements reveal unsustainable expansions and questionable accounting practices that suggest either negligence or incompetence at the executive level." A few board members shifted uncomfortably. Ebony continued, "I've prepared a plan that addresses both the ethical and financial pitfalls of Global Horizons. My associates and I are prepared to inject the capital needed to revitalize this airline, but we require a leadership change." Bremer's eyes narrowed. "You can't just barge in here and demand control. We have defenses in place, and the board will not capitulate to a hostile takeover." At that, Ebony nodded toward Gregory Shaw, who was seated beside her. He handed out folders to the board members. "Inside those folders is our proposal," Ebony explained. "We have the support of a major pension fund and several minority investors. This is not a hostile takeover. It's a rescue operation, and we have the votes to carry it out." A tense silence filled the room as the board members skimmed the documents. Ebony could practically hear their minds racing. Bremer's face darkened, but he said nothing. They all knew the airline's financial woes were severe enough that fresh capital and fresh leadership might be the only way out. Finally, a board member named Patricia Lutz spoke up. "If this is truly a legitimate offer, perhaps we should at least consider it. The airline stock has been dropping for years, and we've had difficulty refinancing our debts." Ebony held her breath, anticipating Bremer's counterattack. The chairman stiffened. "If we were to entertain this," he began, "what guarantee do we have that you won't dismantle the airline and sell off its assets for profit?" Ebony met his eyes. "I built my career helping struggling companies pivot toward growth. I'm not interested in a quick liquidation. I want Global Horizons to become a leader in customer service, corporate responsibility, and profitability. I've already outlined the operational changes and expansions into more viable routes, focusing on strategic alliances rather than reckless spending." She let her words settle. "I also want to ensure that no passenger, regardless of race, gender, or background, ever experiences the humiliation and abuse I did. That means we'll overhaul the security and training programs." We'll end contracts with companies that fail to meet rigorous standards for employee conduct. Another wave of silence. Bremer exchanged glances with the CFO and the legal counsel present, realizing the depth of Ebony's research. In that moment, Ebony felt the scales tip in her favor. She was calm, methodical, and fully prepared. The board saw the writing on the wall. Ebony Lancaster was not just a disgruntled passenger, she was a formidable force. After a flurry of hushed side conversations, Bremer cleared his throat. "We'll need time to review your proposal and consult with our legal team." Gregory Shaw nodded. "Of course, but be aware that if this board refuses to act in the best interests of shareholders, we have the votes to call an extraordinary shareholders meeting and replace you." The tension in the room was palpable. Bremer was cornered, and he knew it. "We'll respond by the end of the week," he said stiffly. Ebony gathered her things, stood, and offered a polite nod to the board members. "I look forward to your decision." Walking out of the building, Ebony couldn't help but feel a surge of triumph. Her heartbeat drummed with adrenaline. She had just stared down a room full of corporate titans, and they blinked first. The next step was ensuring that they either accepted her terms or were swept aside by the shareholders. She told herself it was about justice, about ensuring no one else suffered what she had suffered. But as she gazed up at the towering skyscrapers of Manhattan, Ebony also recognized another layer to her motivation. This was about power, the power to change a broken system, to rewrite the rules that allowed men like Officer Thompson to act with impunity. Soon she'd find out if she truly had the power to make that happen. Within days, the board capitulated. They publicly announced that they had reached a preliminary agreement with Ebony Lancaster's investment group to infuse capital into Global Horizons Airlines and restructure its leadership. Part of the deal, brokered behind closed doors, required Chairman and CEO Malcolm Bremer to step down. In a carefully worded statement to the press, Bremer cited personal reasons for his sudden departure, but insiders knew the truth. Ebony had effectively shown him the door. The announcement made headlines. Major news outlets covered the takeover, emphasizing the dramatic twist of a passenger wronged by the airline, rising to become its primary stakeholder. Activists and social commentators lauded Ebony as a trailblazer, a testament to resilience and tenacity. Of course, there were critics who labeled her move vengeful or opportunistic, but Ebony paid them no mind. Her first official day in the airline's executive suite felt surreal. Ebony stood in front of the glass windows overlooking the runway, her reflection superimposed against the vast expanse of tarmac and sky. She thought back to that humiliating moment at JFK, how powerless she'd felt. Now, here she was, the newly appointed executive chairwoman of Global Horizons Airlines. Her schedule was packed with meetings, with the CFO to discuss immediate cost-cutting measures, with the marketing team to revamp the airline's public image, and with human resources to initiate a sweeping review of all security contracts. Ebony relished the challenge. She had prepared meticulously for this moment, surrounding herself with experts who understood the airline industry from top to bottom. Late in the afternoon, she convened her first official meeting with the security division managers. They seemed nervous, aware of the impetus behind her agenda. Ebony cut to the chase. "I want a full audit of every security contract we have. I also want a review of the training protocols and complaint logs. If there have been other incidents like mine, passengers mistreated, property destroyed, or worse, I need to know immediately." The head of security, a balding man named Terence Cole, cleared his throat. "We've always adhered to standard protocols, Miss Lancaster. If any deviations occurred, they were isolated incidents." Ebony's voice was calm but firm. "I want more than assurances. I want data, records, and evidence, and I expect to see them on my desk by the end of the week." Cole swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am." With that, Ebony dismissed the meeting. She sank into her new office chair, a wave of conflicting emotions washing over her, pride in having come this far, anger at the system that forced her hand, and a measure of dread about what she might discover. Still, she steeled herself. This was her mission, to cut out the rot that allowed people like Officer Thompson to thrive. The security audit revealed a pattern of complaints and misconduct far broader than Ebony had expected. The firm that employed Officer Bradley Thompson, Westgate Security Solutions, had racked up dozens of passenger grievances. Most were swept under the rug, with no disciplinary action taken. Some of the complaints detailed incidents eerily similar to Ebony's experience: passports confiscated or damaged, personal belongings searched without cause, and hostile confrontations that escalated into physical or verbal abuse. Enraged, Ebony called an urgent meeting with the heads of every department at Global Horizons that had any involvement with security or passenger relations. She demanded explanations, but was met with deflections and weak excuses. Then she made a decisive move. She terminated the airline's contract with Westgate Security Solutions, effective immediately. It was a bombshell decision, but Ebony didn't stop there. She also ordered a top-to-bottom purge of every executive or manager who had enabled or willfully ignored the rampant misconduct. This included several high-ranking officials who had signed off on large payments to hush up certain passenger complaints. The press got wind of the mass firings. Headlines blared: "Global Horizons' new chairwoman cleans house," and "Airline purge, Ebony Lancaster fires," dozens in sweep of security misconduct. Some analysts worried the abrupt terminations would destabilize the airline, but Ebony was resolute. This was the only way to send a clear message that the old guard was gone and that abusive practices would no longer be tolerated. Stock prices wobbled in the immediate aftermath, reflecting market jitters over the sudden upheaval. Yet Ebony and Gregory Shaw remained confident. They believed that once the dust settled, investors would see the wisdom in restoring consumer confidence by rooting out corruption. And indeed, surveys showed a sudden spike in positive public opinion, with travelers stating they felt safer flying with an airline committed to accountability. Behind the scenes, Ebony used her expanded power to ensure that Thompson's fate was sealed. She reached out to Westgate's CEO, making it clear she expected formal disciplinary actions against him. Though Ebony no longer had direct authority over Thompson, her airline no longer employed his firm, her influence was enough to force a response. A week later, Westgate announced that Thompson had been terminated and was under internal investigation for misconduct. It was cold comfort, but Ebony took solace in knowing that at least for now, he couldn't harm another traveler in the same way. And so, in a single sweeping motion, Ebony established a new era at Global Horizons. The firing sent shockwaves through the corporate world, warning any future employees that racial bias or abuse of power would be met with zero tolerance. Privately, Ebony felt a mixture of satisfaction and lingering fury. She had done what she set out to do, bring accountability to the company that wronged her. But it hadn't healed the invisible wounds she carried. That would take time. In the weeks that followed, Ebony tried to refocus on the airline's future. There were hundreds of decisions to be made: daily route expansions, fleet maintenance, marketing campaigns, staffing. She was determined to prove that her leadership wasn't just about retaliation or symbolism. It was about building a successful, ethical airline. Yet life had a way of circling back with its own brand of poetic justice, sometimes in ways one could never predict. A month after the mass firings, Ebony received startling news. Malcolm Bremer, the ousted CEO, was facing legal troubles. Investigators discovered he had funneled company funds into shell corporations, siphoning millions of dollars for personal gain. The scandal broke publicly, painting Bremer as a corrupt executive who had orchestrated shady deals that contributed to the airline's precarious financial state. Ebony watched the news coverage, seeing images of Bremer hiding his face from reporters, refusing to comment. She remembered his sneering dismissal of her concerns. Karma, it seemed, had come for him swiftly and mercilessly. Though Ebony derived no joy from his downfall, she felt a certain grim vindication. This was what happened when unethical people wielded unchecked power. Not long after, Ebony heard that Officer Thompson's personal life was also unraveling. Rumors circulated that his aggression at work mirrored a pattern of abusive behavior at home. His partner had filed a restraining order, citing domestic violence. Once that became public knowledge, Thompson became an untouchable in the security industry. No reputable firm wanted to hire him. Ebony learned of these developments from Simone, who had contacts in legal circles. She felt a complicated pang of emotion relief that he was finally facing consequences, sadness for his partner, but no pity for the man himself. He had reaped what he sowed. As for Westgate Security Solutions, the avalanche of negative press led to cancelled contracts, culminating in the company's eventual bankruptcy. Their CEO resigned under pressure from board members who accused him of running a LAX scandal-ridden operation. In the end, Ebony's public stance against Westgate triggered a domino effect that toppled not just individuals but the entire enterprise. Through it all, Ebony found herself in a strange emotional space. She had set out to correct a grievous wrong, and in many ways she had succeeded beyond her wildest hopes. And yet, the swirl of media attention, legal showdowns, and personal vendettas left a bitter taste. Was this the kind of victory she had wanted? Part of her yearned for a simpler life, free from the burdens of corporate wars and moral crusades. But she couldn't undo the past or abandon the mission now. Too many people depended on her shareholders, employees, passengers, and a broader public who saw her as a beacon of hope. Ebony vowed to channel all the pain and triumph into building a truly world-class airline, one that would exemplify the best of human values, respect, dignity, and progress. Once the dust settled, Global Horizons Airlines began a gradual but steady revival under Ebony's leadership. She poured resources into overhauling customer service, ensuring that passengers felt genuinely valued and safe. She instituted diversity and inclusion initiatives at every level of the company, hiring a workforce that reflected the global community it served. Financially, the airline stabilized. By focusing on profitable routes, striking alliances with other carriers, and investing in modern planes with reduced carbon footprints, Global Horizons' reputation surged. The media hailed Ebony Lancaster as the woman who took on an airline and won, though Ebony herself saw it as only the first step in a much larger journey of transformation. One day, as Ebony was surveying a newly refurbished wing of JFK's Terminal 4, dedicated to Global Horizons, she was approached by a young black girl who looked about 11 or 12 years old. The girl clutched a small carry-on and wore wide-eyed excitement on her face. She recognized Ebony from TV. "Are you Ebony Lancaster?" the girl asked timidly. Ebony smiled. "Yes, I am. What's your name?" "Mia," she replied, her voice quivering slightly with awe. "My mum and I are traveling to Paris. I just wanted to say thank you. I saw the news about what happened to you and how you fought back. It made me feel like I can do anything." Warmth flooded Ebony's heart. She knelt down to Mia's level. "You can, Mia. Never let anyone tell you otherwise." They exchanged a brief hug, and Ebony watched as the young girl bounced back to her mother. That moment, more than any media headlines or corporate accolades, validated Ebony's journey. She had turned her personal ordeal into a force of change that rippled through countless lives. This was the essence of leadership, using power not for self-serving ends, but for uplifting others. That evening, Ebony lingered in her office, gazing out at the runway lights at JFK. Planes took off and landed, each carrying dreams, hopes, and stories. She remembered how she once felt that these airports were portals to freedom. Now, she was responsible for one of them, ensuring it remained a place of possibility for all, free from prejudice and abuse. A soft knock on her door broke her reverie. Simone Garcia poked her head in, smiling. "You all right, boss?" Ebony turned, a peaceful expression on her face. "Yes," she said quietly. "I think I finally am." She had found a sense of closure, though it came wrapped in the complexities of corporate leadership and moral responsibility. She had bought an airline, fired everyone complicit in wrongdoing, and watched karma deal out final verdicts. She had shown the world that a black woman's passport, literal or metaphorical, could not be torn as a means of denying her destiny. If anything, the act only fueled her ambition to fly higher than ever before. And there you have it, the electrifying journey of Ebony Lancaster, the woman who turned humiliation into triumph by taking control of an entire airline. From the devastating moment her passport was torn at JFK to the high-stakes corporate showdown that put her at the helm of Global Horizons Airlines, Ebony proved that determination and justice can prevail against even the most entrenched systems. If this story inspired you, stirred your emotions, or made you think differently about the power we all hold, please consider liking this video, sharing it with your friends, and subscribing to the channel. Your support helps me bring you more stories of resilience, transformation, and high-stakes drama. Let's keep celebrating powerful narratives that remind us, no matter who we are or where we come from, we each have the potential to soar beyond every obstacle. Thank you for watching.